My name is Arpan Patel, and I'll be giving this webinar on CRUD Swagger API docs with Gitpod, Node.js, and Express. A little about me: I'm an Anant apprentice. I joined Anant in December 2019. Some of the most recent public work we've done is helping DataStax create some repositories and work to essentially showcase how to use their new service for Cassandra in the cloud called DataStax Astra. And if you want to visit or go to a workshop tomorrow at noon, I'll put the links in the chat. Let's see, chat. Oh, where'd it go? There we go. That is the Eventbrite link if you want to attend the workshop. And here is our API if you want to learn Cassandra and DataStax Astra. We have two APIs, Node and Python, if you want to get a head start. So back to the presentation. So a little about Gitpod, if you don't know what it is. It's a IDE. It's open source and based on the online IDE Thea. It's by Typefox, so people who've also contributed to the Thea project. And it allows you to seamlessly integrate GitHub and GitLab. So if you want to pull in public repositories, you can do however many you want. But if you have a private repository that you're trying to use on Gitpod, you will need a paid account. So if you want to do this demo with me that we'll be doing later, you can go ahead and go to this link here. I'll send it in the chat. So that way we can get the Gitpod to spin up while we continue with the presentation. So I'll open it myself so that way you can see what it looks like. Ooh. Did that not work? Copy, paste. There we go. All right, so let's try this again. So when you go to Gitpod, you want to type in gitpod.io followed by pound, and then whatever repo URL. And that should start a fresh workspace. So something is not in here. Why isn't this working? Let's stop this. What's happening? Sorry about that. Okay, so you should see it initialize with that link. And so what happens is it builds a Docker container. And so essentially we'll be able to code wherever we want within this container. And let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so a little about Gitpod. You would notice that it's pretty similar to VS Code, and you can use a lot of VS Code extensions. You can access pre-built workspaces, and it supports all kinds of programming languages. So depending on what you want to do, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can do parallel workspaces. So if you don't want to stop doing something on one workspace, you can open a clean, fresh workspace and start working there. If you want to create code reviews or if you want to access Git and version control, all of that is available through Gitpod, even if you're using a public version. Okay, so if we're also with Gitpod, you can create snapshots. So if you want to like essentially quote unquote fork your code for other people, you can do that and just send them a link with the snapshot. And it essentially works on any device. So if you want to open this on your tablet and code on your tablet, you can do that. You can do it on a Chromebook, you can do it on a computer. And again, with the snapshots, you can share running workspaces. So say if I'm working on a workspace, but I want you to collaborate on that specific workspace / container, I can just send you a link and we can get going. So to document REST APIs, our use cases for using Swagger API and the two modules that we'll be using is to create documentation for REST APIs at the code level. And then also at the same time, generate testable API docs that can be run from the server. So users can test your endpoints and see responses and see example responses and see error codes, however you want it, how specific you want to get it, document your API as you go along, or if you want to add this to an already built API that doesn't have documentation. So again, for the demo, what we're going to be doing is coding on Gitpod. We're going to be using one module called Swagger UI Express. That's going to be for serving the auto-generated Swagger UI generated from the API docs that we'll be using Swagger.js doc for. And so that's going to be using comment blocks and YAML structure to essentially pass in what we want to send to Swagger and for it to generate for the UI. So if we go to our Gitpod, if you're doing this along with me, we can go to our source directory and then we can click on app.js. So here is a boilerplate, my own personal boilerplate for a Node Express app. You can fork it if you want, do whatever you want with it, but just don't commit or push any changes to it, please. Okay, so starting from our terminal, we're gonna npm install just to get all the packages in, so we can go ahead and get running with our server. And then once that installs, we'll also install the two packages I talked about, which are Swagger UI Express and Swagger.js doc. Okay, so we'll do npm I swagger-ui-express, and then we can also do Swagger.js doc at the same time. All right, and then if we just double check that they were both added, and they were. So now to start with, we'll need to import them in. So we'll do const Swagger UI is equal to require Swagger UI Express, and then we'll also do const Swagger.js doc, require Swagger.js doc. And so now we can go ahead and get started with creating the options object that we'll need to pass in eventually into Swagger UI. But what we'll do with Swagger.js doc is we'll turn it into a JSON format. So if we just scroll down, we can start on like line 19 or line 20 after making some space. So we'll make a const options object. And then within this object, we'll need a few key value pairs. So we'll need one key value pair called definition. And within definition is another object, or definition object. And within that object, we have another key value pair called info. And with info would be another nested object. And within there is where we define the version of the Swagger API and the title, and even a description of our API documentation. So we'll start with title, and this will be Swagger API demo. We'll need a version. This will be 1.0.0, and we can add a description, which will be 06/23/2020 demo. And then we have to essentially tell within this object where to pull our documentation for our APIs. So where is it looking for those comment blocks that we'll be using? So outside of the definition object, so this is within the overarching options, we'll make another key value called APIs. And because this will just be a bare bones demo just to get you started to kind of learn how to do it, we're just going to do everything in app.js. So we'll have to set it to an array, and it's going to be in our source folder if we're looking at the directory structure and app.js. So that's about it for all you need for setting it up and passing it into Swagger UI. If you have a router system, which a lot of Node apps do, so if you have like a route directory, and then within the route directory, you have route.js and then user.js, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to handle that recursively, you can add, instead of doing it like this, we can do routes folder, and then we can add a asterisk.js. And what that will do is it'll recursively go through the routes directory and pull any comment blocks out that we can pass into our API for documentation. So that's about it for our options. So now what we need to do is create a variable called Swagger spec, and Swagger spec is essentially going to be that JSON value that I talked about that we pass in or we get back from Swagger.js doc. So it would be const Swagger spec is equal to Swagger.js doc, and then we're going to pass in the options object that we just declared. So if you want to just quickly look at what that looks like, we can run a console log Swagger spec, and then within our terminal, we can just run npm run dev to run our server. Unexpected token. That's new. See, where did that break? Source.js consumptions. Swagger spec. Swagger.js doc. It's called correctly. So where did that break? All right. Let's just try moving on and seeing if, because there's nothing there yet, that might be breaking. Just make sure this is set up correctly. Definition, and then we have an object, and within there we have an info, title, version. That's within there. Okay. So to serve these docs, what we'll need to do is app.use, and then we'll set in a path. So we'll just say API/docs. And then within there, we'll also need to pass in Swagger UI.serve. And essentially what that does is handles the Swagger UI files, and then we'll need to pass in Swagger spec setup, Swagger spec. Ideally, that should, when running our API, okay, something is breaking, but I don't know where. Make sure we got this correct package. Sorry about this, I didn't run into these issues earlier, so this is completely new for me. Let's go to Gitpod. Just reinstalling Swagger.js doc to see if that fixes what the issue is. Okay, let's try running dev again. Workspace. JS 31. Swagger.js doc options. It should be right. I don't know why it's freaking. Const options. Object. So let's try doing that. See if that fixes it. I know why. It's because I can't spell. All right, there we go. Definition. All right, so now if let's comment this out and let's look at what console log Swagger spec looks like. Sorry about that. I'm an idiot. All right, so now we're seeing what we're getting back in that JSON that this returns, Swagger.js doc options. We're getting some info. We're getting the Swagger version. So if I didn't mention this, but you can change the Open API version. So Open API version 2 and version 3 differ in the sense that it doesn't take request body as a parameter anymore. It has its own value for request bodies. So if you want to set up post and patch and put that use request bodies, the structure is going to be different. So I'm going to be using version 2. And then if you want to take a deeper look into version 3 and then edit what you've done so far, you can go ahead and try it. But essentially now we know it's working. So let's go back to this app.use. So now that we've set an endpoint and we've served it and we sent in what we've done so far, if we run our server, we can click make public and that'll let us access it outside of it. And then we'll hit open browser. So I'm just going to close these real quick. All right. So if we type in API docs, we should see our Swagger UI. Great. Now let's add to it. So we see our version number. So actually, if we go back and comment out the description, refresh, and now we have description, right? So we'll start from this basic hello world I already have here. So what we'll need to do is create a comment block. So I'll just make a routes comment first, and then let's create a comment block. So within this comment block, the first thing we'll need to do is instantiate at Swagger. So we can tell Swagger.js doc to look for it. And then after doing that, we have to define which endpoint this is for. So this is for our base endpoint, but let's make this a little more REST friendly. So let's say API/demo. So this is going to be for API demo. And then this is going to be a GET request. So because this is in like YAML structure in JS doc, you have to be very specific about your indentation or something will break. So just to keep that in mind. So we'll do one tab and then we'll do a GET with the colon. And then we'll add within there, we'll do two tabs. We'll do a description to describe the GET request. So this would be get demo hello world. And then we'll add another, within the same level of description, we'll add a responses option. And then we'll need a colon and then enter. And then we'll need to do something sub responses. So it would be, let's just do something very basic. Again, this is for demo purposes, and you can make this more exaggerated. In my more information slide at the end of this presentation, I have a link to a great article that uses these two modules, and they already have a more complex, obviously, a built-out API. And within there, they use these to document their API to serve Swagger API documentation. So if you want to take a read of that, it'll be linked in the additional information at the end of this presentation. So within this response number, it would be response status would be 200, and then a description of that would be just something very simple, a successful response. And if we save that, all right, what did it break? Oh, I forgot a colon after the path. Again, like I mentioned, it'll break if you're missing something. So it's very iffy. If you want to use like the Open API Swagger UI tool from, I believe it's SmartBear, you can go ahead and look at that, but this is doing it at the code level to show you how it's done. So once that's done, we can refresh, and now we have an endpoint. So if we click on this endpoint, we can try it out. Like I mentioned in our use cases, we can generate API docs that users can try out without having to necessarily need a front end. So if we try it out and we execute it, we should get back hello world. If we look back at our res.send, it's correct. So now in the sense of we're doing CRUD, right? Create, read, update, delete. So we'll start with just the simple one. So we'll do get, and then we can do a get by ID. We'll do a delete by ID. We'll do a patch by ID, and then we'll do a post. So because we already have this get set up, we can just copy and paste it and add some stuff for doing get by ID. So we can just do app.get, and then this would be API demo :ID. And then we would need a request and response. Again, very basic. If you're using async hooks, et cetera, it can be more complicated. But what we're going to do here is do a res.status 200.send, or we'll do a JSON. So we can send back a JSON object. And within this JSON object, we'll say, we'll do get ID, and then we'll set that equal to request.params.id. So we'll essentially send back as a confirmation that we got the correct ID. So if we save that, obviously we're not going to see it yet in our documentation because we don't have a comment block for it. So what we can do here is we can just copy and paste the get and make some modifications to it. So the thing about this Swagger.js doc, we'll have to, instead of doing a :ID, we'll need to do a bracket ID in order to use the params. So it'll still be a get request, but our description is going to change, right? So it's going to be get by ID. Responses can stay the same. So we can just add an extra line. So underneath description, at the same level as description, we'll need a new parameter called parameters. And within parameters, we'll make a : a new line, and within parameters sublevel, we'll need to define variables. So we'll say name of the variable will be ID, and then in the same level of that, with no hyphen, to be specific, it would be description. And this would be the ID to get by. And then at the same level again, we would do in, and that's going to tell us where it is, and it's going to be in the path, right? Because it's going to be API demo ID. And then we'll also add a type, which will be an integer, so that way it'll stop from varchar from coming in. And then we'll also make it a required, and then we'll set that to Boolean true. So that's about it we'll need from there. I'll show you one more thing after we get this running, what we can do to make this a little more souped up, but you can do it on your own. So if we try this out, you hit execute, it's going to fail because it's required, right? So if I do 1, 2, 3, hit execute, my response body, get ID. So I know that it's going through. So we know it's working. Great. So now say if we want to have some type of separation by tags of these APIs. So if we go to within the get at the same level as the description, we'll add a tags. And within tags, their sublevel, it's going to be whatever you want to name the tag structure by. So we'll just do uses ID param. And if we save that, you should see separation once you refresh. Oh, what happened here? Let's do that. ID params. Let's see if that fixes that. All right, that's weird. Tags. ID params. All right, there we go. So now we have a separated structure, right? So if we want to separate it, but obviously this can change, the tag nomenclature can change. But essentially, everything still works the same. You're still going to get failures 4, 5, 6. If you put in an ID, it will get it back. So moving on to delete, because it's essentially by same thing as get by ID in terms of documentation, because it takes an ID and it returns a response depending on how you have your API set up. So we'll do app.delete. Our endpoint would be API demo :ID for the path. Do request response, and then essentially it could be the same thing. Res status 200.json delete ID is request.params.id. And so the only thing we need to change, we can again copy and paste this get by ID documentation. So just copy that. So now we have, for a delete, we'll need to change the get, right? So it's going to be a delete now. And this is going to be delete by ID, ID to delete. Yeah, that's about it. So then if we go back to our documentation, just minimize that, refresh, and now we have that. See, it's in the same ID tag because our tag nomenclature is the same, right? So if I try it out, execute, it'll fail. Let's do 789, execute, and it'll run a curl request, send in the data, delete. So it's recognizing the YAML structure in the JS docs, and we're getting our ID back that we plugged in. Great. So now we can move on to patch, since that's the same thing as in using the ID param. And then we can move back to post. So patch will be a little bit more involved because we're going to involve a request body. So stuff that I've researched online, a lot of tutorials and a lot of documentation, they don't necessarily have a lot about OpenAPI 2.0 request bodies. So hopefully this can be helpful for you. So what we're going to do is make a app.patch /API/demo:ID. And then we're going to need Express's JSON middleware parser. So you can either do const parse body parser equals express.json, or you can just call it within it. It's easier just for demo purposes, express.json. And we'll need to do request response. Okay, and then within here, we'll do res.status 200 again, .json. Again, so if you want to add more stuff, you can do res responses 200. You can add a 404. Say if you have some kind of validation in here, someone's trying to delete something that doesn't exist. So you can add those example responses that people can see. So it'd be like 200, a successful response, 404, not found. Yeah, going back to patch. So we'll send back a JSON body of patch ID, and that will be from the params. And then we'll also send back let's just give 2 variables. So we'll say new item name will be request.body.item name. And then we'll do new item description, and that will be request.body.item description. All right, so now to document that, we can just copy and paste this delete one that we have here. And then we'll need to change delete to patch. We can keep the tags the same, but this will do patch by ID description with rec body. Description, ID to update. And so now what we'll need to do is introduce a request body. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that within the parameters in the same aspect, and then we'll need to add a schema. Say if you're reusing multiple schemas in this kind of documentation, you can set at the very beginning definitions that the user or that whoever's writing the documentation can reference with the pound, whatever. if you look it up and if you want to get more involved in this, it's easy to find. So under parameters, we'll make a new one. So in line with name ID, we'll do name rec body. And so within rec body, again, like how we did name description in, but there's only one tab. So this one's going to be a description is going to be request body. And then we're going to do in, and then in is going to be where we do it. So in for path for request params, in this one's going to be a body. And so when you do it like that, we'll need to define a schema. And so when you define a schema, we're going to need a sublevel of the type. So this one's going to be a body, so it's going to be an object. And then we'll need to define the properties. So the properties are going to be what we defined here, which are item name and item description. So first for item name, we're going to define the type it is, which is going to be a string. And then at the same level as item name, we're going to do item description. Don't forget your colons. And then the type is also going to be a string. And then we can also set it to be required. Required at the same level in the schema equal to true. Or sorry. It's a little different when you're doing it with the request body. So required, you need to define which items are required. So required, it would be item name with the dash in front of it, and item description. Let's add a space here just for congruency. So we can kind of go through what we did, right? So we changed this to a patch, and now we've added a new parameter, which is a request body. So within the request body, we'll need an in. So like in path for ID, we'll need an in body. And when it's an in body, we have to do a schema. So this is where I meant where Open API doesn't use this structure. It uses something called request body. I personally haven't looked too much into it because I found that this works and I wanted to learn more about it first. And by all means, you can go ahead. If you find anything, please reach out to me. I would love to learn it. And maybe I can do a series and we can look into Open API 3 as the version 3 as the next part in this series. So within the body, we have a schema and we have to define the type, which is an object, and we have true properties. So we're taking item name and item description, and then they're both types or strings. So if we save this and we go back to our Swagger UI, we'll now see a patch within the tags ID param. So if we click on this, we try it out. Let's just try hitting send, execute, and it'll fail because we have a required on the IT integer. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then this, and then for our item name, we'll do new item name, and then description, new item description. And when we hit execute, we'll see the curl patch, we'll see the data syntax, and the header with application JSON, request URL, and we get the response body. So we know it works. We saw it go through. And so now to do post, it's almost the same thing, but just a little less involved. Again, if we had a router system, obviously this would be much cleaner, but this is just for demo purposes, so we can do this quickly. App.post, and then we'll send this to the base route of API demo, so kind of where that get hello world was. And then we'll also need to pass in express.json again for middleware for breaking down and parsing the request object. And then we'll need to do request and response. All right, so now we'll do the same thing. So res.status 200.json, and we don't need to do a patch ID, but we can just do new item name is request request.body.item name, and then item description is request.body.item description. Let's save that, make sure nothing broke. So now we can copy and paste the documentation we did for the patch and just make some quick edits to it. Okay, so now all we need to do is take out the tag section because, right, this isn't using an ID param, right? We're sending it to the base route of API demo. So we can get rid of this. And then the description, we can edit post to create a new item. Parameters, we don't need ID, so we can get rid of this part. So we can keep the request body, description, request body in body schema, and the schema doesn't change, right? Because we're posting something, and obviously depending on how your API is built or how you're going to build it, obviously these properties can change. And if we save that, and if we go back, refresh our docs, and now we should, don't forget to change this part. Sorry, forgot about that. So line 143, we're in an estimate, so also need to change the path. So we're not using brackets ID anymore. We're using base demo, and this is going to be a post. By refresh, there we go. So the patch went back into the correct spot, and our post is now in the post category. So if we try this out, if we said item name is new item created, and then new description of item created, and we execute that, we'll see the curl post takes it correctly, application JSON in our data structure in the curl request, and we'll get our response body how we set it. So, right, we sent a request body of new item created, a new description of item created, and that's what we got back. So we know that when we document this, our parsers are working, our middleware is working, and the documentation is working correctly. So now what we've done in this demo is essentially documented a very basic app that does CRUD operations, quote unquote, and we created testable API documentation for users to use. So all they have to do is, if they clone this repo, all they have to do is run run npm install, and then run the server, and then in their browser, Postman or whatever they're using, probably not Postman, but in their browser, just go to the endpoint that you set up here, and you can name that in your README. So for us, we did API/docs. So however you want to do that. So now they have a testable version to test your API without needing a front end. And that's about it for the demo. And going back to our presentation. So if you want to work with us here at Anant, we do corporation to corporation engagement. We do subject matter expertise in architecture and senior development. We do full or half day net 30 billing. We have US based and authorized experts. We also travel to clients for scheduled on-site visits, and we also have remote offshore resources available. If you want to work with us in terms of automating or creating, or sorry, if you want to help expand and make your business platform more efficient, please reach out. You can contact us at Anant.us. You can email us at solutions@Anant.us, or you can call us at the number listed. And again, like I mentioned, the additional info. So if you want to look more at Gitpod, then obviously I showed, which was very little. And if you want to learn more about Node and Express, we have links there. If you want to learn more about the packages that we used, so UI Express for serving the documentation and JSDoc for documenting, I have the links there. And then if, like I mentioned before, that there's a more involved walkthrough, I have it linked here. And when this video is live on YouTube, this slide deck will be available so you can access it there. And I can now at this point open it up. If anyone has any questions, you can send it in the chat. All right, so it looks like we don't have any questions. Again, like I mentioned, I may look into using these same two modules and maybe doing a OpenAPI version 3 of this and seeing how it differs from what we've done today. But hopefully you were able to take something away, and maybe if you want to try documenting your code at the code level and generating Swagger UI docs that users can test. Hopefully you were able to learn something, and I'd like to thank you for coming. And if you want to reach out to us at Anant, again, you can reach out to us at these listed, or you can visit us at anant.us. Thank you.